Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Weird Tales from the Woods, Volume 5, Story Number 1. This happened in a haunted house in which I lived. I lived there between the ages of 9 and 14 with my dad and brother. Let me give you some background. My dad gained custody of my brother and I when I was 7 and my brother was 4. For a while we lived in a small 2-bedroom home. The rooms were all small and it just felt cramped. I hated sharing a room with my brother and him having access to all my stuff. So my dad told us that our current landlord bought the much bigger 3-bedroom home down the road and was willing to rent it to us. I was thrilled. My dad was a prison guard. He would later be promoted to a correctional counselor and was hardworking and not home between the hours of 6 a.m. and 5 p.m. We had babysitters up to the point I was around 12. Then none, and we had to get ourselves ready for school and usually feed ourselves. This was never a problem because we knew how to cook and keep house, and we mostly had a good relationship with our dad. I will note, he was an annoyingly skeptical man at this point in his life. I remember when I was touring the house the first time, I really paid attention to most of it, just fought my brother for the biggest room. I stood in the middle of the room and just spun around, marveling at all the space I would have. I had absolutely no reason to be upset. But then, for some reason, I just felt, dead inside is the only way I can describe it. I walked out and told my dad I didn't feel right. He told me it was probably because it was hot in the house. I accepted this because I didn't want to think about it anymore. I wanted to be excited for the new house. We moved a week or so later, and for a while my feelings were good. For some time, my room felt welcoming and cozy. I have fond memories of laying in bed, wrapped in my tie-dye comforter, watching television when I was supposed to be asleep. These were good times, but that didn't last long. Life was fine in the house for a couple of months. At the most, I maybe saw a few movements out of the corner of my eye, but such things are easy to dismiss. The one thing that bothered me most was the basement. It was a cave of concrete slabs, low ceilings, and a deep, dark storage room where we kept all of our Christmas and Halloween decorations. The main open area had our washer and dryer and a bunch of my dad's driftwood projects he'd sold to local pet shops for use in terrariums. The basement made me feel sick, like a deep pit of dread in my stomach that wouldn't go away until I went upstairs. Of course, laundry was my job, so I would make my trips down there as quick as I could. It started with the voices. They were quiet at first, but eventually I would be startled awake by random screams that no one else in the house seemed to hear. Heavy footsteps and banging outside my bedroom door became common. My room was at the center of the house, off our computer room. My dad was on one side, by the kitchen, and my brother was on the other side, off the living room. So we weren't exactly close to each other. Soon after this started, however, my brother began sleeping in my dad's room, so something must have bothered him too. The activity remained constant for a while, with things getting knocked over, noises at night, and general eerie feelings. It didn't escalate until one night when I had some friends over. I believe my dad was playing poker with the neighbors, and my friends and I were drawing and listening to music. Suddenly, one of my friends said, "Wait, who's that?" We all stopped to look where she was pointing. In my dad's large TV, we could see our reflections sitting around the table. But there was someone else, the vague reflection of a man, sitting on the couch behind us. We were stunned, looking back and forth from the empty couch to the TV screen. My friend stood up, and we all watched in horror as the mysterious figure on the screen turned slowly to look at her. We all screamed and ran outside. I ran down the street to try to get my dad to come home. He insisted we scared ourselves. As time went on, things in the house got worse. I began having episodes of paranoia and insomnia. I'd always been a stubborn kid, but I became depressed and refused to get out of bed some days. I felt weak and dazed and just not present in the room with others. As my mental state deteriorated, the spirits of the house moved in closer. I began to see them. At times, a tall, shadowy, slender man, shaped figure would creak open my bedroom door to stare at me. I would hear what sounded like a woman, softly crying under my bed. There was a man with a burnt face who would hide in the dark corners of the basement. I would hear his raspy breathing before I saw him. It felt like a nightmarish Dr. Seuss book that my father refused to acknowledge. One day, I was walking through my computer room, and it felt like I ran into someone's open hand, and as the fingers began to squeeze around my neck, I ran backwards and just stood holding my neck in shock. Later, I began to cough up small amounts of blood. This concerned my dad, and he took me to the ER. The doctor shone a light down my throat and said I had several tiny lacerations in the back of my esophagus. He asked if I'd accidentally eaten some metal or glass. I was sure I hadn't. A couple of months after this, I woke up spitting blood again, with the same cause. Then it happened to a friend of mine when she spent the night. I still don't have a proper explanation for these injuries. I feel my breaking point came when I was retrieving the laundry from the basement. I was almost up the stairs when I felt a cold hand wrap around my ankle, and then I was violently yanked, screaming down the concrete stairs. This event ripped a huge patch of skin off the front of my leg and also left my cheek and elbow bleeding. As I hit the basement floor, I heard a raspy laugh, mocking and cruel. I ran upstairs sobbing, begging to my dad to move, pleading with him to believe me. He simply insisted. I lost my footing, and he took care of my wounds. Determined to prove to him the house was haunted, I made a pair of dowsing rods. For anyone who doesn't know, dowsing rods are bent metal rods that you hold in your hands that rotate when they come in contact with magnetic energy. They were once used to detect underground water. More often, they're used to detect spirits. These days, anyway. I made the rods out of pieces of a cut-up wire hanger and used straws to separate the metal from the skin of my hand. My dad watched amused as I walked around our computer room with the rods. As I approached a wall shelf that held my dad's precious Moments figurines, the rods began to aggressively rotate towards me and then move back as I stepped away. Does that mean they're full of water? My dad laughed. Shortly after he said this, it was as if someone swept their arm along the shelf and threw every single figurine against the wall. My dad's face dropped. I didn't end up feeling as satisfied as I thought. After that, the spirits started stalking my dad at night. They knew he knew about them now. No point in hiding, I guess. My dad finally disclosed to me that a shadowy figure stood in the kitchen outside his room at night and watched him for hours. He couldn't sleep at night anymore and almost lost his job. We moved soon after this. As the years went by, I saw many families move in and out of this house. No one stays there for long. I had an opportunity a few years ago to tour the house as it was available for rent again. Walking from room to room, it was clear the energy was still present, dark and heavy as ever. I asked the landlord, in the most passive way, if any of the previous tenants had said anything about any activity. He was surprised by the question and informed me he just bought the property. We ended up talking for a while, and I gave him the best heads up I could. Luckily, he seemed more intrigued than upset. Hope he keeps that enthusiasm. I didn't rent the house, and have put it and its less than pleasant occupants in the past. One thing I will always be thankful for is the endurance I developed living there. I'm no longer afraid of ghosts. Story number 2. Well, let me give you some backstory to this weird, unusual event. We live in the backwoods in Texas, about 30 to 45 minutes to the biggest town, and yes, we live down a back road. What I know could be a Bigfoot, a Wendigo, or what we all fear, skinwalker, might be out there. But it all started about 2.5 years ago. This was before I met my girlfriend, before our land was clear cut. Back in August of 2018, I went out to the garage. This is about 50 feet from the front and the back door, and I'm tooling around, and I can hear my father on the opposite end of the property on the tractor. I'm in the middle of the garage, and I heard something brush against the back wall of the garage. And seeing horror films, I ain't gonna go out there. A few weeks went by, same thing happened when my dad was at work. That same day I was leaving for work, and the clump of trees behind the garage began to shake forcefully. Fast forward a few months, it's either February or March of 2019, my girlfriend decided to look out the back door. This was in the patio. She started saying, "No, no, no, no," followed with shutting and closing the blinds, and ran to the guest bedroom closet to hide, and she began to cry. I followed her to the bedroom to calm her down. Whatever she saw scared the you-know-what out of her. About 30 minutes later, we opened the patio blinds. Nothing was there. She said there was a hairy thing crouched over. Its back wasn't facing here. Then, about 2 months later, in June of 2019, right before the clear cut of the land, my girlfriend found an airsoft gun under my bed. It was about 7 or 8 p.m. at night. So she said, "Let's go shoot puddles in our circle drive." We were shooting about 20 minutes, and we ran out of ammo. I went inside to get the buckets of plastic pellets. I was gone maybe the most 3 minutes, and I come back out. My girlfriend told me she yelled for me because she heard a whistle in the woods. I told her I didn't hear it, and I decided, though, to go inside. A month later at night, she's walking out to her car. She got to the car, and then she hears a whistle in the woods again. A month or two later, we clear-cut our land, and the experience has stopped. Then about October, we got a couple of friends. Let's call them Brad and Lizzie. And Brad is part Native American. I'll begin with this. There's a railroad that travels between the main towns we go to. A few months ago, Izzy saw Skinwalker one night along these tracks. Brad saw one before Izzy did a mile further down the tracks. 3 weeks ago, my girlfriend, Brad, Izzy, and I had to stop by my cousin's house. They live off the main highway on a 2-lane road across from those tracks. I just had to drop off a Christmas gift. So I got out, opened the trunk, and Brad tells me to hurry up. So I hurry up and hurry back to the car. Brad tells me to drive now. So we go. My girlfriend and Brad saw 2 glowing white eyes across the street. So they've had 3 experiences with a skinwalker on that railroad. My girlfriend and I were leaving for work around 10 a.m. My girlfriend said she saw something across the road in the woods. Then out of nowhere, we heard a train horn a few yards behind us. We live down a dirt road. If someone had a train horn, we would have heard it by now. I heard skinwalkers can copy voices or sounds. That same night, when we delivered some gifts, my girlfriend saw a black figure on a back road behind a grocery store. The next day, she saw the figure leaving work, and the following day, she saw it along the tree line at dusk. Last night, my dad and I were taking the trash out. We had a spotlight, and he was shining it around and saying, "Skinwalker." Halfway to the house, I told him to stop. I saw 2 eyes about 8 feet high. They were white, really light bluish, like LED lights on a car. I asked for the flashlight, and I shot in the direction that I saw the eyes. Nothing was there. Now, before I forget, the first time Brad was at the house, he came up to me while I was grilling. It was about 7 p.m., so it was dark. He asked me if I had a weird feeling like something was watching me, which before he came out, I had that feeling for 2 or 3 months. Now, what do you think it is? Next story. Let's begin with some background. My boyfriend, best friend, and I are from a tiny town in Pennsylvania. We were invited to spend a weekend with our best friend's grandparents in Michigan who live in the forest. There are trails that stretch for miles and a giant lake in the middle of it where we only had seen swans chilling. The biggest problem in these forests are ticks, right? We arrived in Michigan on Saturday, and today is 5 days later, and last night, which was Wednesday night, around 1 a.m., my boyfriend and my best friend and I were smoking in front of the forest near the trail entrance. We wanted to stargaze and watch deer, plus we weren't allowed to smoke inside the grandparents' property. During the beginning of us setting up, the wind was blowing against our backs as we faced the forest. We were joking around, trying to smoke while shivering and just having a nice conversation while standing around. We stood in a diagonal line and heard rustling. I jokingly said, "What if it's a skinwalker?" Our senses were heightened because, we didn't want the grandparents to know that we had left in the middle of the night. They're old and old-fashioned, so when they don't know we're home or not, they will spam the phones asking where we are. So after our friend B checked his phone over 10 times, him and I heard a female voice in the distance directly where their house was. We were about 200 feet away from the property, and B heard this grandmother's voice clearly, very clearly, calling out our names in order and saying, "Come inside." This was unusual because before we left the house, all the lights were off and they were asleep by that time. We made sure. After the voice cut off, we heard more very loud rustling in the woods right in front of us, like 10 feet. And it sounded like heavy footsteps trampling through the brush. We were silent for a couple of minutes, listening to the sounds of the dead leaves being crunched, and it sounded like someone was trying to watch us through the trees. It was louder than what a deer would make, or a bear. There were no noises, growling, or anything, just the instance of something large walking around. The wind also did a 180-degree change of direction. It was now blowing against the front of us instead of our backs. We immediately turned his phone flashlight on and yelled, "Hey!" about 3 times. During the yelling and pauses, the footsteps quickened and seemed hesitant to leave the area in front of us. It sounded like 2 feet, not 4, like an animal, and it started to run towards the lake. Before this, I should mention that the sounds of the swans honking were nice and peaceful. Then when the entity or whatever it was began to run away, scared, the swans were shouting and yelling. They were absolutely going crazy. The lake was far from us, and the water level had fallen. Bushes and random trees went away before you could reach the water. But when the entity ran towards it, we heard the splashing as if it was right next to us. It was that loud. So loud we could hear each trudge through the water individually. Our fight or flight kicked in, and we all kept our flashlights on towards the forest. I checked behind us, opened all the car doors so we could dart in if needed, and kept talking at a loud volume to keep whatever it was away. Once they were in the water, the swans were screaming and seemed to leave. The sounds of trudging through water died quickly and everything was silent again. We left immediately and went home. None of us were quiet and tired. It was like we didn't even get the effect of what happened till after we got home, and then it really hit us exactly what was out there watching us. Next story. A few years out from now, I was out hunting with a friend when we lost legal light. So we hiked back to the truck and hit the road in his parents' new Ford half-ton, the ones with the sensors all over the vehicle. We had some music playing as we were just heading back towards town again, when the music started acting weird and cutting in and out with static. So, me being in the passenger seat, disconnected the Bluetooth and reconnected the phone. Music cleared up and we continued down the road. We continued driving slowly down the road because it gets pretty rough in a couple of spots and the road has a few sharp turns and an S-bend. Well, we went about 1 kilometer further and the music starts screeching and doing what we can only describe as alien noises. So I disconnected the Bluetooth again and my friend says, "Hey, Mom's got a cord in here." So he stops and gets the cord for me. I plug the phone in and play music again. Another kilometer down the road and the phone goes crazy. I mean, loud alien squealing and sounds similar to that dial-up internet noise from the 90s. We had started into the S-bend when this was happening and we shut the music off completely as we were still driving, making the one half of the S-turn. And then we both looked up from the music deck or the screen and the headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. So we swerved and took the ditch a bit, still going probably 30 kilometers per hour, and got the truck back up on the road. We continued coasting down the road as we were both in awe after just seeing a flash of this thing. I finally said, after what seemed like 5 quiet minutes, "Man, did you just see?" My friend cuts me off and says, "A skeleton in the middle of the road?" I said, "Yeah, like a white rib cage and a deer skull for a face." He finishes and says, "Turn around. I mean, what was that? Does someone need our help?" Not thinking that we're in the middle of nowhere with no vehicles around or any that we had passed from other hunters. It was still early season and no one bow hunts here anyway. My friend said, "I'm not turning around. I feel sick, like I'm going to throw up." And he continued driving. We didn't see another vehicle until we hit pavement again. It was taller than the pickup by easily a couple of feet, and I'm 6'1". My forehead is at the top of the window for reference. It had black surrounding the white of the bones with long arms half stretched to its side as if it was saying, "Try and hit me." I watched this thing pass the passenger window and stared up at it as we went by, and it was definitely three-dimensional. Tall, with long arms, and dark, dead-looking, like light was sucked into it without reflecting anything. Hard to explain. When we hit the service road again, my friend received a text message from his mother saying, "What did you two idiots hit in my brand new truck?" I guess the new Ford send near accident reports to the owner when the sensors pick up something. I'm an old school Chevy guy, so I don't know. The only thing I can find online that resembles what we both saw is a Wendigo, without the antlers. Or at least the headlights didn't illuminate them. So whether it was a Wendigo or something else, I hope never to cross its path again. Next story. I was roommates with a couple for over 2 years. Due to cost of living problems, I rented a room in their house. The woman owned it and the boyfriend was along for the ride. He was from Michigan, north of Detroit. The home's in Portland, Oregon. The boyfriend told me a story of when he was at his home north of Detroit and one of his small sons started screaming, and he went into the son's room to see what was up, and the boy was pointing at the ceiling. The guy looked up and saw a pale man crawling on the ceiling. Described him as super skinny, like an Auschwitz survivor, super pale with red glowing eyes. The guy went into his bedroom, grabbed a shotgun from the closet, and came back, and the crawler was crawling down the hallway on the ceiling. So the guy took a shot at it, but it didn't even flinch, but crawled into the attic door in the ceiling of the hallway and disappeared. The guy called some of his friends, who brought their guns over, and they looked all throughout the house, including the attic, but found nothing. He was adamant this was a true story. I read other stories about these creatures who are sometimes called rakes and other times pale crawlers. The Native Americans called them Wendigos and described them as very pale and emaciated with red eyes and large dangerous teeth and claws. The same fellow, the boyfriend, who the house owner, had an old German Shepherd dog. His dog was abandoned by her first owners. Dog's name was Gabby. Gabby was obsessed with a man and never wanted him to leave her sight. I think she feared being abandoned again. Well, Gabby attacked a possum that had gotten in the backyard and killed it. But the possum had some disease, and Gabby got the disease and seemed to be going blind. So the guy decided he had to get rid of Gabby, but didn't want to pay the $300 to the vet to put her to sleep. So he called a friend, and they took a shotgun, and they took Gabby up to the mountains and finished her off with his shotgun. The guy was heartbroken, but he figured he had no choice and could not afford to get her treated, and did not want to see her suffer. Anyway, one night, I come back late and went into the kitchen. There were no lights on, just the light from the moon. And in the kitchen, I saw a very clear shadow of a German Shepherd. Well, that house had 3 German Shepherds. Gabby was only one of them. I pinched off a little of the meat in my cheeseburger I had brought and offered it to the dog, who appeared to sniff it, but I couldn't hear any sniffing. It was very dark except for some moonlight. In any case, I was surprised when the dogs would not eat the meat. Dogs always love meat. And the dog walked down the hallway into the bathroom. I followed the dog only to find the bathroom door shut. I was right behind the dog. On the other side of the bathroom was another door that led to the bedroom of the woman and the boyfriend, the owner of Gabby. The only way the shadow dog could have gotten into the bathroom was to walk through the door, which it did. I guess Gabby just couldn't stay away even in death. The other incident I had in that house that I would have dreams in which a young woman would crawl from under the house and tell me that they were buried under there and if I could help them. There is no basement in the house, just some crawl space that is infested with dangerous spiders. I had no intention of digging there, But later, I dug a hole for a fence post and found a young woman's old-style bikini bottom. Several times, something flicked my shirt in various places, and I'd look around and see nobody. Next story. I haven't told this story to anyone other than the family I talk about later, and I'd rather forget it. I'm hoping that putting this out will get it out of my hair. Anyway, here's the story. I have this friend whose family rents this specific house thing up in Sunset Beach, North Carolina. They would go pretty much every year throughout my buddy's childhood. One year when I was like 18, his dad got a nice bonus at work, so he brought me and one other friend along. We'll give my friend's name as Alex and the other one was Brett. The house had some goofy name. All of them did. The only one I could remember was Fiddler on the Reef. We spent the week doing various stuff on the beach and going to restaurants and whatever. The second or third night, Brett suggested we go walking on the beach in the pitch dark. Alex was not cool with that, and after some prying, he confessed that if you go far enough north at night, the low tide reveals these sand flats type thing that go on for a while. He said that him and his older brother and his dad and aunt had gone there at some point and experienced the exact same thing, which is once deep into the flats, some kind of tall, dark figure, I don't know, tall, would follow them. Apparently it would be really slow but speed up as time went on. Alex said that when he went, after hearing the story from his family, he went all the way up the flats before looking back. When he finally saw it, he saw it by the swampy area to the west. Long story short, he ended up running back through the flats and lost sight of it around when the rental home started. Regardless, we didn't believe that this happened. I mean, come on, who would? So Brett and I went to the flats, against the wishes of the hosting family. We left the house at about 9:30 and started walking. It was like maybe 30 minutes to an hour before we got to the start of the flats. Up until the point, the most interesting thing that happened to us was finding a really big jellyfish that washed up. Anyway, I can't speak for Brett, but I know that I pretty much forgot that we were looking for an urban legend, and I didn't even think to look back until the end of the flats. It was really cool, actually. You could see this fancy hotel right across from the end of the flats, and they kind of lit up the whole area. After talking and goofing off and doing whatever teenagers do, we remembered the purpose of our little trip, and we looked back towards the swampy area. We didn't see anything, so we approached the area. Once we got closer, I swear I saw it. Brett didn't. So we kept approaching. He stopped walking. He saw it and was trying to see if it was moving, and it was. I didn't get too crazy, and I tried looking at it better, but finally we booked it back. I mean, we stopped running after like 10 minutes, but still rushed back. That was the extent of our encounter. I understand that this may have been difficult to believe, and I apologize for that. But just think that we were, and at least I was, a true skeptic, and I can't explain what we saw that day. And next story. Well, let me tell you the backstory on this, and you tell me what you think. I live in a pretty rural area in Michigan, close to the lake, and I'm currently living alone, since both of my parents are in Canada taking care of my great uncles in his late 80s. And they've been gone for a month or so, and probably won't be back until maybe another month. I'm 19, so I'm old enough to be alone. But some really odd things have been happening in the last 2 weeks. Started back in September when my 15-year-old cat Ginger Snap went missing. At first I figured she had passed away since she was very old and had a few health problems already. But a few days later I found her body completely torn to shreds on my back porch. I mean, she was severely mutilated to the point where I threw up while sobbing hysterically. I came to the conclusion that it must have been a bird of prey since we have a lot of large owls and hawks where I live. A few days passed, and in October something odd happened. I was watching TV around 11 p.m., and I kept hearing a really fast knocking sound. It would come in sets of fives and then stop for a second and restart. I ended up going outside to investigate, and I couldn't see anyone, but there was a really bad, horrible smell there. Then what happened one night, I'd woken up a little, like around 3 a.m., which happens sometimes if, for example, had a messed up dream. So I walked down the hall to get a drink and probably watch TV. And when I got to the fridge, which is right next to the back porch door, I heard someone walking around. I froze up and stayed completely still. I looked over the door and saw a huge shadow. It was kind of crouched on its hands. I don't really think it saw me, but it looked human. It didn't move for like a whole 3 minutes before the shadow moved. In the blink of an eye, it was just gone. I ran back to my room and called the cops. When they got there, they couldn't find anything and told me that it would have been very difficult for a person to get to our back porch since it's suspended about 15 feet in the air. And there wasn't any ladder, so I'm kind of freaked out since I'm alone. I mean, I don't know much about the supernatural outside of standard werewolves and vampires, but I just wonder, was that a human being out there or something much, much worse?